Hi guys, in this episode of the Nostalgia Peak, I am once again going to be sharing my top 20 episodes of one of my favorite cartoons ever that I've watched and that I've covered on the channel, that being the Fullmetal Alchemist 2003 series. And I'm gonna be completely honest right off the bat, this was honestly the toughest list that I've ever had to make for this series on the channel. Because this show is honestly unlike any of the shows that I've covered so far or that I am covering right now on the channel. Because most series that I've covered and I've done lists for, the episodes that I've decided to pick and put on this list are usually the ones that are more self-contained and are more concept-based episodes that are just a random occurrence that is just really cool and a really interesting idea. And there are certainly some episodes on this list that are like that. But unlike any of the other shows, the Fullmetal Alchemist 2003 series is probably the most continuity heavy series that I've watched on the channel. So, for a lot of these episodes, it was very hard to decide which piece of the specific arc that we were getting at the time deserved to be on this spot. Like, for example, think back to the arc where we were exploring Laboratory 5. That's like 4, 5, or 6 episodes of the same story arc continuing. And it's kind of hard to decide which one of those episodes was particularly the best one. And even now, I don't know whether I've picked the best one. But I have picked one of them, and I'm gonna stick with it. So, maybe this is not the ultimate top list for episodes of this show. That's honestly fine. I've done the best I can with this. And I'm honestly only definitely sure for the spots for some of the episodes that I've picked, specifically for those which are more concept based and are more self-contained, which is why the episode that I've put at number 1 is the episode that I've put at number 1. And I'm sure if you guys watched my reactions to the Fullmetal Alchemist 2003 series, you will know which episode is at number 1. And once again, before we get into the list of episodes, I want to remind you that soon I will be covering the Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood series. So you can be on the lookout for that as well. And I can't wait to see how much fun I'm going to have with that one, because if nothing else, it's going to be very different from the 2003 series. And if my reactions to like TMNT 2012 are any indication to how I experience the early 2010s style of reboots of my favorite cartoons, I think ultimately I'm gonna enjoy it, but probably it's gonna take a little bit before I get into the right mood for it. But I'm still really excited to get into that. And also, I do want to remind you that I would really appreciate it if you guys could help me out with my transition by donating to my Patreon or Ko-fi account. Because for those of you who didn't know, I am trans. But you'll learn a little bit more about that at the end of this video. Anyway, I think it's time to start off the top list of episodes for Fullmetal Alchemist 2003 with number 20, episode 3, Mother. So, the reason why this episode is at this spot is because, from what I remember, this is the first episode in this series where we get a lot of really brutal, gory, and horrifying stuff. That's one of the bigger reasons. Because from what I remember, I think it was in episode 2, we had a really horrifying concept where Rose's boyfriend, I think it was, his consciousness or something, or part of his soul was put into a homunculi-ish creature created by birds, which was able to say her name. I'm still not exactly sure what that concept there was, whether it was just birds which were able to imitate that voice or not, and they were able to say that, or whether his actual soul was stuck in that. But that is a horrifying concept on its own. But in this episode in particular, we get the gory stuff. when they end up trying to bring back their mom and seeing the completely jumbled, horrifying homunculi body of hers. Like, that is some horrifying stuff. Seeing the brothers lose their bodies and body parts, that is horrifying. Having Winry learn that her parents are dead, that is really emotionally crushing. That is all in all really cool. It's basically the beginning building blocks of the whole story arc of this series and the motivation for our characters. And it is a really good, dramatic, and memorable episode. I really enjoyed the first two episodes. I really like that little story arc. It kind of is honestly a two-parter for all intents and purposes. Surprisingly, this show has only one official two-parter, even though I feel like it should have more. But this is the first episode where we actually get into what is, in my opinion, the best part of the 2003 Fullmetal Alchemist series, which is the drama, the depth, the goriness, and just the maturity in general. And obviously also have Roy Mustang being introduced here, I believe, which is something that I had completely forgotten about until preparing for this video, literally. So that was really cool to see. I wasn't actually aware that that's how early on he was connected to the brothers, because he was actually around the home village of Risenbull when they did the human alchemy, when they tried to bring back their mom. And from what I remember, he's there to, like, he was searching for their father or something, but now because they survived the alchemy, he is more interested in them than their father. So again, we have the planting of the seeds of their father stuff early on. So yeah, really cool episode, but based on the fact that this cool of an episode is this down, every single other one that we got and was even better than this. But this one is very much a formidable, really, really fun episode. So, at number 19, we're gonna have episode 49, The Other Side of the Gate. And again, if you watched my reactions to the Fullmetal Alchemist 2003 series, which I want to ask you, if you haven't, why haven't you? Why the hell are you even watching this video if you haven't? But if you have seen my reactions, you know why this episode is on this list. Because I am incredibly fascinated with the concept of what is beyond the gate in the Fullmetal Alchemist 2003 series. From what I've heard, there is no such thing as what we get in the 2003 series in the Brotherhood series. Like, there is no other side of the gate. I don't want to, like, say anything more than that in case it's a spoiler, or in case, which I guess it kind of is already saying this, but from what I've heard, from what I know, this is a completely original concept for the 2003 series. And it's one of the reasons why I'm worried about how much I'm actually going to enjoy Brotherhood, because for me, the other side of the gate idea with, like, the parallel world and everything is a core part of my love for the Fullmetal Alchemist. I really love that movie, and I really love what that whole concept and story is. And in this episode, we kind of get it for the first time. We get a little bit of an idea of what is actually on the other side of the gate, because in this episode, at least his soul gets sent to the other side of the gate, after in one of the previous episodes his father's soul was sent on the other side of the gate. So that is obviously really cool, but it's more something that should be talked about in relation to episode 50, not this one. This one, for me, it's really cool because in the preceding couple of episodes, as it is in this episode, we have a continual story arc with all these characters which were shown throughout the series kind of coming together and having some kind of a role in the final story, culminating with Ed being led by the brothers who are impersonating him and his brother early on in the series, the other brothers, Elric. He's being led by them to, like, an old church, a Christian church, under which there is this giant buried city, which similarly to the other side of the gate, is a concept that I really, really like. There's just something really eerie and horrifying about a giant city buried under an already existing city. It's just such a fascinating concept. And funnily enough, this series is not the only series in which this concept is present, and I love it in the other series that does it as well. For those of you who are curious which the other series is, it's Ghost Whisperer. A really cool series that I'm currently reacting to on the channel, and we still haven't gotten up to those episodes as of the recording of this video, but we're very close to it. I'm pretty sure it happens in like season 3. So that's fun, but it's such a horrifying and creepy concept. And I feel like this show honestly does it with a lot of gravitas. Like just seeing the buried city down and then learning the story of how it came to be and everything. It's just so horrifying. I feel like it adds more to like the weight of what it costs to create a Philosopher's Stone than what we got in Lior in one of the previous episodes. Like just seeing this city still intact but buried underground and a new modern city being built above. There's just something more impactful about that reveal than what we got with the creation of the current Philosopher's Stone in Lior, you know? Plus, in this episode, we obviously have the confrontation between Ed and Dante for the first time, and we have this kind of conflict about whether equivalent exchange is an actual thing in alchemy or whether it's just an imaginary rule. I kind of like that idea, but I really wish it was, I guess, a discussion that the show had from the beginning, because I feel like it really didn't. It kind of feels a little bit like it came out of nowhere in this last bunch of episodes, but I feel like it could have been a cool discussion that we have had throughout the series. The only reason why it still kind of works is because it's a principle that was one of the earliest things that the show established, like literally in episode 1. So it still works, but the discussion I feel like kind of came in too late. And talking about coming in too late, it's kind of separate from this episode, but I really wish, similarly to the concept, to the discussion being introduced earlier on, I really wish Dante as a main villain got introduced earlier on in this series, because I feel like she kind of comes in halfway through the show, and from what I know, it's around the point where the series diverges from its source material. So it does kind of feel like they came up with their own villain, and it's kind of clear that the show wasn't necessarily building up to her being the villain. It only kind of started building up to her being the villain from like the 20th or 30th episode. It doesn't feel like it was starting it from the beginning. Whereas what I think the villain of Brotherhood is, I'm pretty sure is built up from the beginning. But I don't want to talk about that. Please don't comment anything about that, because I don't want to get spoiled about who the actual villain is. I think I have an idea, but it's still just an idea. I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, we have the conflict between the them, a little bit of a fight, and she sends him to the other side of the gate, where it turns out it's the real world. You have, I think it's like either London, I think it's London, but correct me if I'm wrong. But it's just, again, a really cool concept in an episode with, honestly, a lot of really cool discussions, cool concepts, and cool ideas in general, you know? It's a really, really fun episode. Now, at number 18, though, we're gonna have a little bit of a different episode compared to the previous two. Instead of some really heavy stuff, we have one that is a little bit more fun and more action-based. That being episode 13, Fullmetal versus Flame. Probably the second best or third best action scene in this series in my eyes. because that's one of the things for me that was really lacking in this series, that I was really excited about enjoying but didn't really manage to enjoy that much, that being the action. And outside of the action between Mustang and Edward in this episode, the other episodes which have some really cool action are obviously the movie, the fight against Greed probably being the best fight in the actual series, and then the final fight against Envy at the end of the series before Ed gets murdered. Those are pretty much the only action sequences that I really, really enjoy. And I feel like the fight between Roy and Ed is genuinely pretty fun because it's just not a serious fight. It's just a test of their abilities. And it has a lot of comedic moments, a lot of just cool alchemy, cool epic alchemy fights between the two of them, with Roy blowing stuff up and Ed obviously creating stuff and creating his iconic blade on his arm. That's pretty cool. And obviously we still have some emotional stuff with Roy suffering from PTSD from the Ishbal rebellion. That's pretty cool. And we also have the really, really iconic and probably my favorite piece of soundtrack of the Fullmetal Alchemist series, that being that harmonica tune, which plays pretty much every time that Mustang is sad. I'm pretty sure it plays when Hughes dies, and when Mustang is crying at his grave. That's such an iconic and memorable tune. I definitely will miss it in Brotherhood whenever sad moments happen, because I don't think it is in there. I'm pretty sure and assuming that the soundtrack of Brotherhood is probably completely different. So I'll definitely miss that theme. To me, it's iconic, and it's what I remember the most about the soundtrack of the Fullmetal Alchemist 2003 series. I really, really like it. But yeah, in general, the fight is really fun between the two, especially with how much they love to kind of bicker and hate each other. Like, it's always so fun to see their bickering. They are so alike, and that's why they hate each other, and I love that about it. But yeah, now for number 17, we have probably the funniest episode this early on in the series, that being episode 10, The Phantom Thief. And if it's not one of the funniest episodes of the series, it's definitely the horniest, because that's also a thing about it, because the character which the episode focuses on is one very pretty woman, honestly. And I really loved watching this episode when I watched it. Like, it was a really fun episode. It was definitely the funniest at the time of this series. I honestly don't think it's ultimately the funniest. There is one that is a more wacky episode later on, but I had honestly forgotten how crazy and how enjoyable this episode was. And that's the one thing that I feel like the latter half of the Fullmetal Alchemist 2003 series kind of dropped the ball a little bit on, that being some of the more episodic stuff. Because when I was first starting my reactions to the 2003 series, I was obviously hoping that I was going to be enjoying the action and stuff. That was what I remembered about it the most. So I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to have a lot of fun with action with this series. And then the action just wasn't anywhere near as entertaining as I remember it being. So the other thing that I latched on early on in the series in terms of what I was looking forward to and what I was enjoying about the series was some of the more episodic concepts. In this episode, it was the Phantom Thief. And in the latter half of the series, I feel like we definitely got focused far more on the main story of the series, and we didn't really do much of any episodic concepts, with one notable exception, but we haven't gotten there. But yeah, this is a really funny episode. I enjoyed it. I love the bickering between Ed and the Phantom Thief. I don't remember her name, sorry about that, but I really love that. And I love that she even teases him sexually. Like, I don't think something like that would be done in the Brotherhood series. I would be surprised if something like that is done in the 2003 series. That is like some horny shit. But yeah, really fun episode that honestly almost doesn't feel like it belongs in this series, but I am happy that it is part of it, and I definitely enjoyed it. At number 16, we're gonna have episode 43, The Stray Dog. The episode in which we are finally officially introduced to Ed and Au's father, Hohenheim of Light. Apparently that's his name. I'm still not exactly sure whether that's genuinely his name or that he's going by, but we're just gonna call him Hohenheim for short. And yeah, honestly, there's not necessarily that much to this episode other than that aspect of it. I do enjoy that he finally gets introduced. In this episode, we see him in person, especially because I'm pretty sure in like one of the previous couple of episodes, it's when we have the new intro for the series, like the new theme and the new opening. So you see him there for the first time a couple of episodes afterwards. He gets introduced here. But here with this episode, we are kind of getting into, again, one of those cases where a lot of the story is just very continuous from episode to episode, so it's kind of hard to like say which episode is better than the other ones because they're all just the pieces of a continuous puzzle. So just like a lot of the episodes surrounding this one, we have a lot of the characters introduced over the course of the series kind of continuing to show up and do stuff. Like in this episode, we have the brown-haired chick and the blonde dude who were taking care of it, and now I think around episode 20 or something, when we were dealing with the Laboratory 5 stuff, show up again and inform Ed and Al that they're being chased by the military, and they want and the military wants to charge them or something. We have that. Then we have Mustang confronting Ed and Al about the fact that they ran away and they didn't just ask for his help, which was a really cool moment, honestly, in this episode. I really enjoyed that because I did not expect... It's always been very hard for me to read exactly what the intentions for Mustang are throughout the whole series, because he seems so loyal to the people in power. He seems so loyal to the military. And yet, we've shown that he has suffered a lot through the wars that the military has waged, like the Ishbal Massacre and everything. That has hurt him a lot, and we know that his ultimate goal is to become the Führer, to make the country better or whatever. But at the same time, sometimes I feel like he's a little bit too loyal to the military for him to get his goals. Like sometimes it feels like he has drunk the Kool-Aid of the military stuff, you know? And then it's funny because at the end of the series and the end of the movie, he doesn't become anything in the military anyway, so... As far as we know of, anyway. He just goes off to be a soldier in a random location, which I guess kind of goes against his character arc a little bit, but I kind of like it because I feel like him becoming the Führer feels a little bit of a boring ending for his character. I like that he has decided that he doesn't want to be that because of the sacrifices that characters around him have had to make, you know? But this moment... at the end of this episode was really nice and a really cool one. And I also really like some more of the backstory that we learn about Hohenheim. And I love how he mistakes Winry for her mom, I think. So that's kind of interesting, showing that... And also there's the aspect where we are teased a little bit about his potential age, because he talks about a certain path that Ed and Al seem to be taking to get back to Risenbull, mentioning things about it that haven't been true for like more than 100 years, showing that he's older than he looks. So that's a little bit of a tease about where his character is revealed to have come from, or whatever you want to call it. So that's pretty cool, but there isn't necessarily too much to describe about this episode in particular. I just feel like some of the more interesting aspects of what the story has been around this episode kind of culminates here in a way. So yeah, that's why it's kind of hard to like rank episodes of this show in my eyes, because so many of them are just these middle pieces of the large story, and it's kind of hard to pick which one of these ones kind of describes the story the best and hits all the right spots for it. But I think this one is pretty good in that regard, and I definitely enjoyed it quite a lot, especially the ending of it. Then at number 15 we have episode 30, Assault on the South Headquarters. This is again kind of an all over the place episode with a lot of different aspects of it that I really enjoy, but the most notable parts of it for me are, one, the backstory that we learn about Izumi and her child dying and her trying human transmutation and trying to bring it back, and that costing her her inner organs. Um, it's again cool concept, very similar to what Edenau kind of went through. I guess it means that in the Fullmetal Alchemist world, whenever you try human transmutation, for some reason it always kind of sacrifices part of your body. But I wonder what is the arbitrary reason for why certain parts are forced to be sacrificed or whatever. Like, I'm curious about that aspect of it. Like, why did it take all of Al's body and the leg and the arm of Ed, and why did it take her internal organs? And also I really like the concept of her, the rest of her organs that were left were managed to pick up the slack for the ones that she lost. Like, that's pretty cool. And honestly, at first, for me, Teacher was really not that interesting of a character. Like, she felt a little bit bland and a little bit uninteresting, but I definitely have grown to love her quite a lot once I've seen the whole story with her and Wrath, her child, the homunculus of her child. That's pretty cool. But I love how in this episode she, despite the fact that she knows that this is a homunculi, she still goes on to save that child from the military. Which, by the way, this episode really paints the big blonde guy. Like, I forget his name. I'm really terrible when it comes to the names of characters in this show, but the Armstrong dude, it really paints him as a bad guy. Like, these moments, like the one in this episode, really make me hate the military so much. And so many of the characters that we're supposed to be supporting, despite the fact that they're in the military, just pisses me off. Because in this episode, he works with Archer to take the homunculi kid away from Edenau, despite the fact that Edenau just managed to convince him to side with them and to not run away. Like, that is so annoying, because it easily could have shaped the story going forward, but no, he had to be a bad guy and steal the homunculi kid. Like, come on. And yeah, like I said, I love that she has to go on a spree to save her child, and I love how there's like a five-sided conflict when she gets there about who will get the child. Like, that's such an epic set piece or a situation where all of these characters happen to be. Like, I always love fights and conflicts in stories where there's more than one side to it, when it's not just good versus evil, but there's either multiple good guys with just different motivations and multiple bad guys with different motivations. It's always so fun to me because it makes it for a more complex story, you know? Especially if some of the bad guys have conflicts with each other or some of the good guys have conflicts with each other. It's just so much more fun. I really like that. So that's another really cool aspect to it. But just like last episode, there isn't necessarily a darker, like, undertones to these two episodes, which is a little bit of a shame. And in that way, it definitely makes me feel like I should have put these episodes under the previous four. But I still like them. As the pieces of the bigger puzzle that they are, I think they're really fun and really satisfying. And I almost forgot to even talk about this, but there's the iconic scene in this episode where you have Armstrong and Izumi's husband doing the handshake thing. That is the iconic scene of, like, game recognizing game. To me, it's honestly as funny and as entertaining as it is, just because of how much attention everybody puts on it. Because to me, I really don't care about it too much on its own, because I'm personally not into the super masculine stuff or whatever, for obvious reasons, being trans and all. But it is a little bit of a funny moment with how they all both of them try to be like super muscular and show off their muscles more and more, and just how funny of a concept that is. I really enjoy I really find it funny, I mean. But I love this iconic scene as much as I do, only because of how iconic everybody makes it out to be, if that makes any sense. But yeah, it is pretty fun. So next, at number 14, we're gonna have episode 21, The Red Glow. And this this episode is jam-packed with a lot of story pieces. And out of all of these episodes, which are just the pieces of the larger story arc at the moment, this is probably the one that is the clearest best out of the bunch. Because in this episode, we have all of the pieces of that story arc surrounding episode 21 present in it. We have the cool moment where one of the prisoners turned into a soul trapped into an armor, talks to Alphonse and convinces him that there's a possibility that he's not actually a human being but an artificial soul. I love that idea, throwing that kind of like worry inside of Al's head. I love that Scar shows up and has a fight with this guy and helps Al. I love that they have a talk a little bit. I love that they end up fighting some of the homunculi. We have the introduction of greed. We have the really cool concept surrounding the other guy that Ed was fighting, turning out to be two brothers who are attached to this one armor. And I love how one of them ends up killing themselves by essentially pressing on the blood seal. Funnily enough, I actually thought that that was something that was gonna happen to Ao at some point. Like, apparently when I watched this show originally, that moment stuck out to me because it's an epic and cool moment. But I didn't remember that there was other people whose souls were attached to armor. So for that reason, I guess, that moment of him breaking his seal has stuck with me as if that was something that was going to happen to Al at the end of the series when he became the Philosopher's Stone, because for whatever reason that's just how I remember it. I don't know why, but that's how I remember it. But no, it didn't happen to him. It happened to an allegory of him and Ed. And that was pretty cool. I really like these characters. That was a cool fight, in retrospect, between Ed and those two brothers. But that, I'm pretty sure, happened in the previous episode. We also have a little bit of a backstory dump on Scar, which I also obviously really enjoy, telling us how similar he as well is to Ed and Al's situation. Him being a little bit more of a version of Al, him being the younger brother in a way, but he also has the aspects of Ed with like the arm that is not actually his and everything. So I love how his character is, I guess, developed, and the backstory that is given to him in this episode is really cool, and I really like it. Like, Scar is together for me up there with like Ed and Mustang as like one of the best characters of this show. I really like him. He was definitely the most entertaining character because I feel like whenever he showed up, things happened, like exciting things happened. He really shook up the status quo as soon as he showed up in the series, and every episode that he showed up or did anything, like, it was so cool. I really enjoyed him. But yeah, this is a jam-packed episode. And then we have also, I believe, Ed given the opportunity to create the Philosopher's Stone, unbeknownst to him, sacrificing a bunch of prisoners, but he chooses not to do that, I'm pretty sure, in the next episode. But there's that. So we also have Tucker showing up in this episode. There's a lot of stuff happening in this episode, is all I'm trying to say. And it is the culmination or the most interesting episode out of the bunch. But the whole story arc was a little bit annoying to get through because of how long it was, because it was the first like big arc that we got in the series. After this became more common, but this was the first time, so I was just kind of sick and tired of it by the time I got to like the 5th or the 6th episode in this little arc. So I might have not necessarily appreciated it as much as I should have when I watched it originally, but in retrospect I do really like it a lot. And luckily, all I said so far about this episode flows nicely into the one at number 13. That being episode 40, The Scar, which, similarly to episode 21, is an episode jam-packed with a lot of different aspects and reveals, like how in this episode it's revealed that the Führer is a homunculi. We have the death of Marta, and in the beginning of the episode we also have Al versus Gimli, which is a really cool fight between the two. I really did enjoy that. But the most important aspect of this episode is for sure the stuff with Scar. We get more on his backstory and what happened with his brother, who was apparently trying to revive his lover or whatever, who is lost, by the way. Fitting, don't you think? But I love the fight in this episode between Scar and Ed, and that kind of is the last fight between them, actually, if I remember correctly. Like, after these, they're pretty much, like, not fighting anymore, and he kind of dies, like, 2 episodes after this anyway, so there's that. But I love how in the fight that the two have, once again, the characters that they are get compared directly by Edward calling out Scar for basically being an alchemist, because despite the fact that he doesn't believe himself to be an alchemist, he needs to think and work as an alchemist for his arm to do anything, because you know how he blows stuff up with his arm, like he blows up people's brains, and he blew up Edward's arm. In this episode, Ed pretty much calls him out that for him to be able to do that, he needs to know how to do alchemy, because he needs to understand the materials that he's blowing up and what they're made of. And he cleverly is able to fight him off because he switches the metals of his automail, which is a really cool and creative idea, and I really enjoy that fight between them. And then obviously that gets interrupted by the Humunculus, which brings us back to Scar's backstory surrounding his brother and everything. And he questions Lust and whether she remembers, I guess, herself from when she was a human, in a way. I kind of actually getting a little bit sidetracked here, but I don't know if I'm going to end up mentioning it on the rest of the list. But I really like that aspect of Lust's character, where she actually kind of considers herself human by the time of her death. Like, she all throughout the series she has wanted to be human, so by the end of it she considers those memories, the flashes of memories that she has, as that being her. Like, she considers herself to be the continuation of the person that her homunculi was created from, you know? And I really like that aspect of her character. From what I've heard, her character in Brotherhood is not as good, which would be disappointing, but I guess we'll see once we get there, you know? But yeah, getting back to Scar's backstory, we also have a little bit more of Kimberly there, who turns out to be the one who took his arm, actually. And that's how he gets his brother's arm. His brother gives him his arm and sacrifices himself to save him. And the scar that he has on his face is done by Kimberly. That, again, ties into the beginning of this episode. And then later on in an episode, it ties into the fight that the two of them have, that is like really cool and ends up in the death of Kimberly. I really remember enjoying that quite a lot. So I kind of love that connection that we have here, because I didn't realize that these two characters are connected. Like, I love how interconnected all the characters are in this series. It's just so fun. Like, every character has an important role to the story. Like, it all feels thought through in a way that I feel like very few shows or stories that I experience are, and I love that about it, you know? But yeah, really fun episode, really cool stuff. I really enjoy it. At number 12, we're gonna have another episode that is pretty close towards the previous one. That being episode 42, his name is unknown. And honestly, last episode, this episode, and the next episode that I'm going to be talking about are pretty much, honestly, one thing, and I love them basically for the same three reasons. Because they're all dealing with Scar. They're basically the last story arc that Scar participates in, because he dies. And I love all three pieces. It's like the three pieces of a three-parter, and I love it. In this episode, it's the final one of the bunch, with him ending up dying and sacrificing himself so the Philosopher's Stone can be created. But the reason why I love this episode is because of the relationship that is continued to be like played with between Scar and Lust, because Lust still obviously wants to be turned into a human, and still she has some kind of feelings towards Scar, not necessarily love or anything, but she has some kind of feelings because she's a homunculus of the lover of his brother. And I just love that relationship between the two of them, and kind of mutual understanding that they end up having by the end of the episode, once he ends up having to sacrifice himself. We also have the finishing of the fight between Scar and Kimberly. I really enjoyed that fight. It's really brutal and really fun game of cat and mouse. I really love that about it. But I love how, after being friendly to Al for so many episodes, he basically sacrifices himself to save Al in this episode, because he sacrifices his alchemic arm that he has left after losing his other one to Kimberly, which was really brutal, by the way. So he sacrifices his other arm to, I guess, kind of put it into Al and turn him into the Philosopher's Stone at the end there. Like, that is pretty cool. I love how he also employs that little locket that prevents Lust from touching Al in any way, shape, or form. It's pretty cool. But the thing that hits me the most about this episode is definitely his death at the end, where he sacrificed himself. And it's just so sad and emotional and brutal because of the talk that he has with Lust about the brotherly love that Ed and Al have, that Scar and his brother never really seem to have. And I love that even Lust feels sad about Scar's death. And it's just so brutal that he ends up sacrificing himself and dying after losing both of his arms. Like, he has suffered so much and he just dies. It's just really sad and really heartbreaking. And I think it's a fitting end for his character. I really enjoyed what he brought to the show, and it was really fun. And basically the next episode at number 11, that being episode 41, Holy Mother, is, again, it's the middle point between the Scar and his name is unknown. And I similarly love it because it deals with Scar for a lot of it, dealing with the fight between him and Kimberly. I love that fight. It's a really great fight. It's cool, it's badass, it's brutal. I really enjoy that, and I love that he even ends up employing Ed to help out and protect Rose and get her out of Lior. It's kind of wild that he somehow got connected to Rose out of nowhere, but that was, I guess, kind of interesting. And either in this episode or episode 42, there's this really cool moment where Rose finally manages to speak up after being traumatized, after getting raped by the military, I believe it was. Like, that's some dark shit. That's not something you're going to see in Brotherhood, that's for sure. So that's another really cool moment in one of these episodes. But honestly, for me, everything that does not deal with Scar is not really that interesting here, but everything that deals with Scar is like a 10 out of 10. And I basically love all of these three episodes, like episode 40, 41, and 42. It's just some really great, morally great stuff, and I love it. That's why he's debatably the most complex character for me in the series, because he's not outright bad, he's not outright good, he's just somewhere in between, and it's so fun to watch. I love that. For number 10, though, we are gonna have a little bit of a different episode. We're going back to some really, really comedic stuff, with definitely the most out of nowhere episode that we ever got in this show, and the most funny one, for sure. That being episode 37, The Flame Alchemist, The Bachelor, Lieutenant, and the Mystery of Warehouse 13. I don't know if that Warehouse 13 name is an intentional reference or not, because I don't even know whether that TV show was a thing back then or not. Maybe it's just a generic choice because 13 is like a scary number, and that part of the episode like was spooky, but it's a kind of cool reference to a TV show which I have not really seen much of. I've seen only one episode that seemed to deal with like supernatural and sci-fi stuff, so that's kind of interesting. But I just love this episode. It just came so out of nowhere for me, and it also came at a time where I was like binging like 16 episodes of this show in one sitting, so I was genuinely like a little delirious by the time we got to that episode, so that probably made it especially hilarious. But I just love it. I cannot even describe how hilarious it is. You just have to see it. And it was a little bit of a pain in my ass having to edit it and edit all the funny parts in it, but I just love it. Like how he dealt so much with Mustang's crew. I think this is the episode where I actually started to enjoy those characters as main characters. Like I finally felt like they were part of the main cast, and I felt like I was on their side and I could root for them, you know? I think it was a very good episode. I wouldn't have minded for that episode to happen earlier, so I could have felt like I was rooting for them earlier, but it was, regardless of that, a really funny episode with a lot of really hilarious moments. It's just, the personalities and the jokes were just like so good. I cannot even tell which one was my favorite. Like I love all of them. Probably the stuff with Havoc's girlfriend and potentially being like Armstrong's sister, like that was probably the funniest one. But I also really like how he calls his military buddies, "You're all jerks," after they mock him for Mustang stealing his girlfriend. Like I love that. There's so much funny stuff in this episode that I really enjoy it. Oh man, such a fun episode. But now at number 9 we have one of the saddest episodes of this show, actually. That being episode 47, Sealing the Humunculus. That being the death of 2 characters which were very emotional. And I really personally, I'm going to get into it more, but I just want to point out the line which Ed says, I think in the next episode, but it's connected still to this episode, so I'm still going to mention it anyway. That being that in this episode, the homunculi of his mom died, and yet he was not able to even shed a single tear, whereas Wrath was bawling his eyes out and screaming bloody murder. I'm paraphrasing here, but that's basically what he said. And that's kind of how I feel about this episode, because it's an emotional episode, the emotional combination of at least 2 characters. Like I said, Ed's mom's homunculus and Lust, with both of them dying in this episode. And it is sad. It is sad for Ed and in Ed and Al's case, is because the homunculi is the homunculi of their mom, and plus certain aspects of what it means to be a homunculi, like the fact that you still have some memories of the life that the human from which you were created from. You have that in your head. Like, there's an aspect to that concept where potentially you are essentially kind of killing your mom. I'm not exactly like sure in depth exactly how homunculus work, like whether the soul, the original soul, is in any way involved. But considering that when Wrath dies, he uh, he meets his mom, Izumi, inside of the gate. Despite the fact that he is a homunculi and not the original soul of the baby, it lets me to think that in some way, shape, or form, the homunculi are just like an incomplete reincarnation. But again, I'm not exactly sure whether that's the rules by which this series treats them, you know? But that's at least how I kind of see them. And that honestly makes the death of even Ed's mom just that much more hurtful, especially with her final words where she kind of talks to them as if she is their mom, despite the fact that she was trying to kill them for pretty much the whole series, but whatever. And obviously, there's also Lust's death, which is also especially emotional because she kind of finally like turned and became good, for lack of a better term, because she helped Edenau uh, defeat not Lust. I don't remember her name. But she helped defeat Edenau's homunculus mom, and she fought Rat, but Rat ended up killing her, and that still pisses me off so much because he's just a little fucking shit that I really, really hate because of that, because she didn't deserve to die. At the end there, I just felt bad about her the same way I feel bad about a lost puppy without a home, because she didn't care about being evil at the end. All she wanted was to be human. Like, she went as far as to just, in a way, beg Ed to turn her into a human, use Ao to turn her into a human. And I just feel bad about her. Like, she became such a sad character. Like, I really felt bad about her, especially when she called out Ed for how hurtful he is with her, with his words about her never being able to be human, or her not being human, thus she doesn't feel emotion, like treating her as some kind of inhumane monster, which again she kind of is, but it's not like it's her fault that she was created, and she has this innate desire of wanting to be human. In a way, now that I think about it, it's a really interesting allegory that is kind of similar to the experience of a trans person. And I'm mentioning this once again, if you didn't realize, because I'm trans. But it is kind of similar because she has this innate longing to turn herself into something else, which is her true identity in a way. And she feels hurt that she is not that thing. So whenever Ed tells her that she's not a human and she can never be, it's hurtful like that. Like, I can kind of sympathize with that. And I really like that about her character. And again, I've heard that her character in Brotherhood is not as good, which would be a shame, because this is definitely a delicate part of her character that I easily feel like either could have been completely forgotten, or could have been just like completely or be mishandled, because for most of the series she doesn't necessarily have that depth to it. Like, she sure wants to be human, but from what we've been told, so do all of the other homunculi. That's their goal. But she in particular seems to be really focused on that. And I just really like that aspect. And it's because, not because she wants to be evil or whatever. Like, for example, in the case of Greed, he wants to be human because he wants to experience stuff. And I don't remember whether he wanted to like live forever or whatever, so there's that aspect of it as well. But for her, she just wanted to be human, like in a very innocent way, and I do enjoy that a lot about her character. And with number 8, we are gonna be continuing with some of that emotional and heavy shit for pretty much the episodes that are left, honestly. Because at number 8, we're gonna have episode 15, the Ishbal Massacre. The episode where we finally learn exactly what said Ishbal Massacre actually was. It wasn't a putting down of a rebellion. It wasn't anything justifiable by the military. It was completely the military going insane and committing a genocide. It's basically the Holocaust in this series. And considering the allegory that this series in general feels like it is when it comes to like being anti-war, and considering what the movie is about genuinely being like an allegory for like the first or second world war, I feel like it's justified for me to call it that. And considering how monstrous all the alchemists that were forced to participate in that massacre were, it was brutal. I had honestly kind of forgotten some of this imagery because it's been like a year and a half since I last watched this episode, and I forgot the really cool fight that we have in the beginning between Scar and Armstrong. That was really really cool to see again. Um, but yeah, some of the images that we get in this episode are really fucking brutal. Like, just seeing all these alchemists just murdering and destroying, that's not putting down a rebellion. And it's some heavy stuff. And then you have at the end there where Scar almost kills Ed and Al, destroying Al's half of Al's body and destroying Ed's arm. Like, this is some heavy shit. And after having watched the previous episodes, it really has some really major weight to it, and I really really enjoyed that final explanation. We also have the actual like final proof that Mustang was the one to kill Winry's parents, and he even is ready to off himself there. I couldn't even recognize him honestly when I watched this episode, from what I remember, because his behavior of being ready to kill himself is so different from the usual confident kind of person that Mustang carries himself as in present time. It's some heavy, brutal shit, and it's a crazily depressing episode, honestly. But so are most of the episodes that I'm going to talk about in a sec. But yeah, some heavy shit. And I had honestly completely forgotten about aspects of this episode, so I'm glad I actually put it as high as I did, because I didn't remember these aspects of it when I put it here. But yeah, and we also had the death of Boss Grant, but I think that was in the previous episode, so I'm not gonna really put it towards this episode, but that was still pretty cool. Yeah, at number 7 though, we're gonna have an episode that I have a very personal connection to, or I guess one that really stuck with me from when I was a child. Similarly to that whole thing about the parallel world at the end of the series, this episode is another one which I vividly remember from when I was a kid, and I was debatably traumatized by it. That being episode 35, Reunion of the Fallen. And yeah, that sickness in this episode that the people suffer from, that turns them into these like, not skeleton, but like frozen people turn into a rock. Like, it not only looks horrifying, but it feels horrifying. And it's just so dark and brutal, and I love it. I really, really love it. When I rewatched it for the channel, obviously, it also kind of reminded me of some of the episodes early on in the series, which are like more episodic and more like horror based, playing on like different horror concepts. Like, we had one episode that had kind of like a ghost, or was it a doll? I don't quite remember, but we had that episode where that one guy wanted to put the soul of an adopted daughter or something into that of a doll, and that, I honestly had completely forgotten how fucked up of a concept it is. That episode easily could be on this list as well. If it's not on my honorable mentions list, I am mentioning it now. I'm pretty sure it was like episode 7 or something. No, episode 7 is something else. I think it was somewhere up there. It was a pretty dark episode that I really really enjoyed. But this episode is similar to that in its darkness, in its horrifyingness, because it has this concept that I never want to suffer from. You know, I never would want to put for my soul to be put into that of a doll, and I would never want to suffer this sickness which turns me into a statue. Like, it's such a horrifying concept. I cannot stress this enough. It's such a horrifying concept, and the visuals in this episode of people who are suffering from it, it's just so horrifying. Like, I think you can understand why that concept stuck inside of the head of my 7-year-old mind. Like, it's a pretty scary concept, and I love it for it. We also have the aspects of lust having uh like what was the word for it? She has a love interest, or somebody who has her as a love interest, which kind of continues to build her, the aspect of her character where she feels more and more human, like, you know how we talked about in for episode 47, where she just wants to be human in a very innocent way, not because that's her goal as this evil creature called Humunculus, but because it hurts her inside, like for the same kind of innocent reason why trans people want to transition. And in this episode, we kind of have a little bit more build up of that, with her like having actual feelings for this human and helping him, kind of because of the goodness of her heart in a way. And I love that aspect of the story as well. But it's just the concept of the sickness is the most horrifying part of this episode for me, and I really, really love that. But yeah, lots of death we're dealing with in this bunch of episodes, and that's also true for number 6, episode 34, Theory of Avarice. Not only do we have one of the prettiest and best looking episodes of this series, not only do we have one of the best, if not the best, fight in the series itself, but the death that Greed suffers from is just weirdly horrifying. Like, I literally checked out all of these episodes before doing this video, because I wanted to remind myself of everything that happened in these episodes, because I've forgotten. And just the visual of where he just freezes up in this like really creepy like body shape, with his face being like horrifiedly frozen, kind of plays into the similar kind of visual horror that Reunion of the Fallen does, but it just hits kind of harder because he's not sick from a sickness. He's dead. And this kind of like rigor mortis situation, which is where your body or the body of a recently diseased creature kind of freezes up and the joints are hard to move for a couple of days after they're dead. The play on that concept here with him being frozen like that is just so horrifying. Like, his face is so horrifying, and seeing Ed so like crushed that he actually murdered him there, and essentially he lost his innocence, it's just so emotionally heartbreaking. And genuinely, Ed wasn't quite the same after this episode. I feel like he definitely became a little bit more mature and a little bit more brutal and ready to kill, and that's the reason why. But yeah, the fight in this episode is really, really good. It's really well choreographed and really fun. Visually, it's really great. I also love how Greed's allies, the Chimeras, were ready to sacrifice themselves to the other Humunculus to protect him. That was really nice as well, showing that there was camaraderie among thieves as well. I always like when the bad guys also are like, have honor to them. Like, Greed was a great antagonist in my opinion in this series, and this was a great way to go for him. Especially because similarly to Lust, the reason why he wanted to be turned a human is not because of necessarily any innate evilness to him, but just because he just wanted to live, you know? He was basically a hedonist. Something that in some ways I can relate to, because I personally consider the point of being alive being to experience life, which is what hedonism is, just living for living's sake, and or should I say living for the sake of enjoying things that you can enjoy when you're alive, like drinking alcohol, or potentially even things like having sex and stuff, but anything that basically gives you enjoyment and satisfaction is the reason why you're alive. And he's basically a hedonist, so it's not the evil reason for him to wanting to be human. Sure, he does some evil things, but the core thing is not evil. That's why I think he's a good antagonist. And I love that he also, in the end, after like Ed murders him, essentially, he kind of like gives him some advice. That again showing that there's like he's not evil. He's very similar to Scar in that regard, where he's more of a morally gray character, and I really, really enjoy that about him. That's really, really cool about his character. It's just a really great episode in every way. That's what I thought more of this series was going to be. And don't get me wrong, we got a lot of good episodes in this series, but this is basically what I thought most of the series was going to be. Like, great action, great characters, great stories, and not a lot of it was. Like, I thought the quality was going to be this, and it was going to be consistently like this throughout the series, and it just wasn't. But I still love it. I still think it's a great, great series. If I had to rate it, I would probably put it like at an 8.9 out of 10, personally. Just so you know. But yeah, at number 5, though, we're going to have something that I'm sure many of you are not going to be surprised about. That being episode 25, Word of Farewell. I'm gonna admit, I didn't necessarily feel as emotionally hit by Hughes's death as most people seem to be. I don't deny that it's an emotional death, and that he's a character who is like a very comedic one, and a very like he's the comedy relief in a way for the amount of time he's in the series, and I enjoy that about his character. But I personally feel like he still gets killed a little bit too early in this series, because by the time he died, I was barely starting to like really get into the series, and that is partially on me because I took so long between reacting to episodes of this show. But at the same time, I feel like maybe they should have waited at least like 5 or 6 more episodes before killing him. Because I didn't quite feel the emotional impact of his death in this series. Because I just didn't quite feel like I was attached to him. And the show definitely did a good job of like giving you reasons why you should care, because he has a daughter, because of his loving relationship with his wife, because he's such a good friend to Roy. Like, many, many reasons why you should like him as a character. But at the same time, I just didn't necessarily feel quite as attached to him as the show meant for me to. And from what I've heard, his death is handled worse in the Brotherhood series, because the early part of the Brotherhood series being so similar to the 2003 one, because they were obviously adapting the same source material, they kind of speedrun to a lot of the stuff in the first like 25, 30 episodes of the original series. They basically speedrun through all of that in like 10 to 15 episodes or something in Brotherhood. So I'm not really necessarily looking forward to that in Brotherhood, but maybe, who knows, I potentially will feel more emotion for his death there, because I have already like become like a huge fan of the 2003 series, and I've kind of essentially rewatched it through the editing of the videos, reactions that I did. So I've definitely become more emotionally attached to that character now, thus I'll probably feel a stronger reaction to his death now in Brotherhood. But yeah, I do really love the aspect of this episode where there's definitely this kind of stressful, foreboding feeling where something bad is clearly going to happen by the end of the episode, because he is investigating this mystery surrounding Laboratory 5 and surrounding the secretary of the Führer, and he gets murdered for it, and the constant like I don't know how to describe it, like escalation in this episode is really, really well handled in my eyes. I think it's really cool and really stressful because by the end of the episode, you are really worried about him dying. And I do personally believe that his death definitely ups the stakes of this series. It definitely makes me more worried about characters such as Winry or Cheska. That's why in that episode where they find out the same information that he found out, I felt so worried about them because of this death. So I do kind of think that this death is necessary for the series, but I also feel like it could have been handled better. But it's still a good episode. I just don't necessarily feel the emotion to the same level that the creators were expecting me to. And I do think that it's an episode deserving to be this high on the list, you know? I'm not doing it, I'm not putting it on this list this high up just because everybody loves it so much, but because genuinely I think it's a very well-made episode. I just feel like the emotion for me wasn't quite there because of the way that I ended up watching the series. But I did feel something when he died. It's just that for me it was more anger than sadness. So yeah, take that however you might. And then we have at number 4, episode 7, Night of the Chimera's Cry. Yeah, this was the first episode of the series which definitely kind of blew my mind in a way, because it was super dark and super sad and super brutal and super fucked up. Like, this show really loves being fucked up, and I honestly love it for that. I feel like this is one show that is more fucked up than most adult focused shows. Like, Jesus, it's really fucked up. Like, having your daughter and your dog be fused into a chimera and then be put down by Scar. Like, that is some fucked up shit, man. I honestly am kind of speechless about it. I was speechless when I watched that episode, dude, because I did not see it coming, you know? But yeah, there's not necessarily much to say about this other than that, because that's just the reason why this episode is so impactful. It's that revelation that that's his daughter. And then throughout the rest of the series, he's working back to get her. He's such a fucked up person. Tucker is such a fucked up person. And yeah, I just love that review. I feel like at this point, because of how much I've thought about it, how much I've watched that scene, and how much I've seen people talk about it, it's been a little bit stunted for me in terms of how impactful it really is and how emotional it really is. So right now, I kind of feel like there was more emotional ways you could have played with that idea and make it more fucked up. But even then, it's still such a fucked up concept. And I love it for it. Like, I love when this show is like this. I love when it focuses on the crazy and gruesome and horrifying aspect. It's like, I love it when this show is like a bunch of horror movies. You know, when it does these kind of like crazy horror movie concepts for an episode. That's my favorite aspect of this show. And this episode is an example of that. And I really, really like it. I guess I just feel like visually it's a little bit underwhelming in terms of horrifying factor. The only reason why this episode and this concept is so horrifying is because of what it actually means, but visually it's not particularly horrifying. I feel that aspect of it could have been played with more. Although looking back to it, like, it's still decently horrifying even visually. Like, seeing this giant dog with his daughter's hair, like, it is some fucking creepy shit, and I love it, honestly. It's great. I really do. At number 3, we're gonna have episode 51, Laws and Promises, Munich 1921. the final episode of this series, which honestly felt more like more of an epilogue than I thought it was going to be, because like literally half of it is just the epilogue. We pretty much run through every bit of the story that was left to be told in like the first like 8 minutes, and then it's just an epilogue, which I definitely did not expect, but it's fine the way they did it, you know. But I love how we deal right off the bat with Ed's death by Al sacrificing himself to bring him, then Ed sacrifices himself to bring Al back. Like all of that stuff is really cool and really emotional, especially when you see Ed waking up with his arm. That's really cool and really impactful. And it's definitely an episode that I actually remember from when I was a child. I distinctly remember the shot of Ed with all the blood marks on his body when he's ready to sacrifice himself to bring Al back. Especially because he didn't have the Philosopher's Stone. Al had the Philosopher's Stone, and that's why he was able to bring Ed back, but especially because Ed was actually dead. But Ed didn't, which is kind of cool that he actually brought Al back without the Philosopher's Stone. I guess there is a way to bring somebody back, you know? Or maybe there was some equivalent exchange because of all the stuff that Ed and Al have been through, you know? And the gate was like, come on, I'll give you this one. But yeah, it was a very impactful episode. I love that Dante finally got her comeuppance, especially by that it was by gluttony, because she took their like consciousness or whatever you want to call it away, so they were just a mindless beast, and she got eaten by them. That was pretty cool, and I love that we also still essentially kind of got to see what the characters were up to after everything that happened. The epilogue was pretty nice, is what I'm trying to say. I loved also the stuff with Mustang and the Führer and all the discussions between them. We also had a little bit of that in the previous episode. Obviously, the most of the fight is, I believe, in the previous episode, but still the most epic part of him lighting his skull on fire and essentially killing him was, I'm pretty sure, in this episode. So that was pretty badass and pretty cool. I love that it was the Führer's child who essentially was the reason why Mustang was able to kill him, because he brought his skull. Like, that was really cool. And I still don't understand exactly what was with the relationship with that kid that the Führer had. Like, is it his biological kid? If that's the case, how the hell was he able to have that kid? I don't get that. I don't feel like it's quite explained, so I'm not sure exactly what it is about it. But yeah, it's a really, really fun episode. And I love the way it kind of ends with both of the brothers reaching towards the sky as if they're on the opposite sides of a wall, which essentially kind of they are, because they are in opposite dimensions, in opposite worlds. It's kind of like, it evokes a feeling in me that has been evoked before by another series that I love a lot, that being Doctor Who, where in the finale of its second season, two characters get stuck in different worlds. Similar, very much the same kind of concept of being stuck in a parallel world. And it's kind of interesting that this is another case of the same concept being done in a similar way in a different series, because we already had the concept of an old city buried between a current city that was done in Fullmetal Alchemist, and in another series which is near and dear to my heart, that being Ghost Whisperer. And now we've had it with Doctor Who as well. And funnily enough, there is another series which has a concept that impacted me a lot as a child, that was later done in a different series. It's a little bit of a sidetrack, but I'm still going to mention it. Because I remember when I was a child, there was this movie or a TV series, I don't know exactly what it was, I don't remember enough about it, but it was a fantasy show or a movie most likely, where the characters, if they got stabbed or hurt in any way, shape or form, they would die by disintegrating into little balls of light, from what I remember. I just remember that they disintegrate. If you guys know what I'm talking about, please tell me the name of the movie or series or whatever it may be, because I've been looking for it forever, and I want to find out what that thing that I watched was before I die. But they basically disintegrate into little balls of light, from what I remember. And that concept of disintegrating into balls of light when you die was used in Yu-Gi-Oh! GX Season 3. That's why I don't think it was just like a dream that I had, but instead it was a series or a movie that I watched. So, yeah, there's a lot of these kind of things. I guess in the early 2000s, creative concepts like that were just being shown in different shows left and right, you know? But, yeah. Point is, I love this episode. Not quite as good as the previous one, because I feel like the previous one had all the weight and all the interesting stuff for the most part, but it's still a good, satisfying ending of this series, I feel like. I think this could have worked as an actual ending without the movie. It's definitely more of a bittersweet one, and it's more bittersweet than the movie, but for me, the movie's ending is still like more emotionally hard-hitting. Yeah, at number 2 though, we're gonna have basically the previous episode 50, called Death. Because all the good parts of this story arc, or the most impactful parts, are here. We have Ed's death at the end of the episode, where he gets killed by Envy, which was kind of shocking. And in the back of my head, now that I have seen that episode, I remember that happening. Like, I remember when I watched it as a kid, and I remember it happening. But the most interesting part is obviously we get an explanation about this parallel world. And what it is, that it's apparently a world that, instead of diverging and going on the path of alchemy, has went on the path of science and stuff, which is kind of an interesting way of portraying that difference between the two worlds, because it's basically the same kind of argument for why the military used when attacking the Ishbalans. So there's that, you know. That's something we learned about in the Ishbal Massacre episode. I don't remember if I mentioned it or not, but it is what it is. And it's also relevant for the movie as well, because of the conflict that we have in the movie. It's basically, once again, the same argument. But I just love all the explanation about that. I love all the exposition about the relationship between Hockenheim and Dante and everything. I love that Ed basically calls her a bitch, which sometimes I kind of forget how foul-mouthed this show is and how mature it is. Like, that shit is so cool. But like, all the dialogue in this episode is really cool. But probably my favorite line in this episode is for sure when the concept of equivalent exchange is questioned, where Hockenheim mentions that the people who die in this world, the real world, their energy gets transported to the alchemy world, and it's used in the alchemy that the people over there perform. So basically, that kind of destroys the whole concept of equivalent exchange, and that is something that Dante also told Ed, and he pretty much says that he still will believe in the concept of equivalent exchange, and if that makes him a child and not somebody who is an adult or whatever, or mature, because he refuses to not believe in that, then so be it, because he prefers to be still a child instead of growing up as a cynical bastard. Again, I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what he says. And I really like that sentiment, because it's kind of similar to, I guess, my kind of thinking, where throughout my life, I've always kind of detested the idea that just because you grow up, you have to, like, stop enjoying certain things. Like, throughout my teenage years, I've been chastised multiple times for continuing to enjoy, like, cartoons like Yu-Gi-Oh! Or playing video games or whatever, because all my peers grew up and stopped doing that shit, but I continued to. And I always kind of focused on, like, keeping the child inside me alive in that regard, and not falling to cynicism. And I definitely have become jaded over the years and kind of cynical at times, but I still think I've kept that child inside of me. So I kind of like that sentiment that Ed has in this episode. It's pretty cool. But yeah, I also like the reveal at the end where we learned that Envy was actually the homunculi of Hockenheim's child, which kind of came out of nowhere, and I really, really like that concept. But and I love how much hate that causes in Envy. That's why she. I keep saying she. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for misgendering her. I don't mean to. Um, that's why they are so hateful towards Hockenheim and why they want to kill him so much, because they are the homunculi of their child. And I honestly wish we got a better ending with Envy, but that is honestly a topic for another time. Before we get to said other time, though, I do want to give you the Honourable Mentions list. A pretty extensive one of episodes which were pretty good, but either they just seem to happen to be other parts of storylines from which I've already picked the best episode, or concept-based episodes that just didn't really feel impactful enough or shocking enough or mind-blowing enough to justify putting on the list. Like, for example, episode 2, Body of the Sanctioned. Freaky, but the freakiness with the bird talking as in the voice of Rose's girlfriend is just not quite freaky enough. Then there's episode 4, A Forger's Love, which is the episode where the guy wants to put the soul of a child inside of a doll, body double of his wife or something. That's some creepy, weird shit. Then there's episode 6, The Alchemy Exam. Episode 8, The Philosopher's Stone. Episode 11 and 12, The Other Brothers Elric, Part 1 and 2. Episode 14, Destruction's Right Hand. Episode 20, Soul of the Guardian. Episode 24, Bending Memories. Episode 27, Teacher. Episode 29, The Untainted Child. Episode 44, Hockenheim of Light. Episode 45, A Rotted Heart. Episode 46, Human Transmutation. And episode 48, Goodbye. And yeah, at this point you're probably noticing that almost every single episode from episode 40 to episode 51 is on this goddamn list. But what can I say? The finale portion of this series is just that epic and that good, you know? I just love it so much. Those bunch of episodes were just so exciting and so fun. And that's why I'm honestly really worried about how much I'm actually going to end up enjoying Brotherhood, because even outside of the parallel world stuff at the actual end of the series, even the build up towards the end with like the final 10 episodes or so is like the best and highest quality part of the series. And that part of it in particular is like the most different, should be the most different from Brotherhood, because the source material wasn't followed for this portion. So I'm curious how different it actually is. But I guess we're gonna find out probably half a year to a year from now. Anyway, going back to the actual list, at number 1, I think you guys have figured out exactly what we're gonna have. That being the Conqueror of Shamballa movie. I know that this video says top episodes of the Fullmetal Alchemist 2003 series, but how could I not put this show on this list? I mean, this movie on this list. There was no way. And the only way I could put it is as the whole thing. So I know that in some ways you can't really compare it to the bunch of episodes of the show, which are clearly, obviously, lower budgeted and have far less time to focus on stuff and explore the concepts or whatever, compared to this movie. But there's also the fact that this movie is just what kind of stuck with me and painted the whole series as a whole for me. Because it's the most recent piece of Fullmetal Alchemist media that I watched before doing this reaction series. I remember watching it in I think it was 2009 or something, and it really impacted me. Because I remember so much of it. I remember the concept, I remember I remember Ao looking so much like Ed. I don't quite remember the Nazi side of things, but it was still like a movie that really stuck out to me, especially the fights, the animation, and everything. It was just really cool movie. I remember watching, even rewatching it. It's the most excited and emotional that I ever was throughout my reactions to the Fullmetal Alchemist 2003 series. Like, I straight up fucking cried my eyes out at the end of the movie, and it was the first time I actually cried in a reaction on YouTube. Even if it wasn't uploaded first, because I'm pretty sure I uploaded my reaction to the finale of season 1 of Ghost Whisperer, where I also cried my eyes out. I uploaded it earlier. That still happened later compared to my reactions to Fullmetal Alchemist, so that was technically the first time I cried in a reaction, but it's just such an all-encompassing movie. I don't even know where to start with praising it. I love that it continues basically from where the series left off, continuing with Ed still kind of looking for a way to get back to his actual world and everything. I love that we see Envy again, and it's really cool that the movie establishes the fact that it's like a more realistic and grounded world for the first like 20 or 30 minutes, and then we kind of start to get into the wacky shit, because I felt like really excited and really weird when we saw Envy again in her dragon form, because we're supposed to be in like the real world or whatever, and I feel like the movie did a good job of establishing that real world atmosphere to where it felt like a crazy thing for them to be in the dragon form in this real world. And personally, I really feel like her ending, their ending here is kind of lame. Like, I don't even know whether they die or not in their dragon form, or they are just sacrificed for the opening of the gate. Because we do have Gluttony and Wrath sacrificed on one side of the gate and Envy on the other one, so I guess they die. I don't know. At least they got to kill Hockenheim, so there's that, I guess. But yeah, I also really like the concept of the conflict in this movie, which personally I feel like it kind of comes a little bit out of nowhere. But the reason why it works for me is because it's basically the same kind of concept as to why the military attacked Ishbal. Because at first, the Nazis just want to use Shamballa as like, they think of it as like heaven or something along those lines. You know, they think of this as this paradise place. But then once the lady manages to like travel to Shamballa, let's call it that, she is terrified of them because of the power that they have, that she, coming from the normal real world, does not understand. Because remember how in the Ishbal Massacre episode, the conflict is portrayed as science versus religion kind of situation, as that's why they fought, because the Ishbalans consider alchemy a heresy and against God, because it's basically portraying humans as if they're gods being able to do these godly things. Well, here, basically the reason why this Nazi bitch hates this world and wants to destroy it is because these magic alchemic powers are beyond anything that people on the other side of the real world side of the gate can use. So she's terrified of it, of something that she doesn't understand. So in this case, the supposedly scientific world becomes the equivalent of the religious side of things, whereas the real world where she comes from becomes the scientific world. So it's kind of an interesting change, which basically puts a Mistress as the victim of the same kind of conflict that they themselves waged. So that's kind of an interesting aspect of it. But yeah, going back to the equivalent exchange stuff though, I really love how at the end, once Ao also goes through the gate to the other side, he gets back his memories again, kind of playing on the concept of the equivalent exchange, that because he also loses his alchemic powers, now that he's on this side of the gate, he at least gets his memories back. Like, that was really heartwarming, but I still feel bad for Winry that she's never gonna see them again, and I'm sure she's also heartbroken and sad about it. But yeah, it's a great movie with also like great visuals and great animation and some of the best, I mean, it's straight up the best fights we've gotten in the 2003 series. So yeah, I don't know, it's a great movie. It's the best piece of Fullmetal Alchemist 2003 media that I've gotten, and I don't think anything in Brotherhood is really gonna get anywhere close to this. So yeah, I don't know, but this is pretty much my list for best episodes of Fullmetal Alchemist 2003. There's probably more things that I could have talked about, but at this point, I'm tired, my voice is tired, so I think we should just end it. I am curious though, what are your favorite aspects of the Fullmetal Alchemist 2003 series? What are your favorite episodes? What do you enjoy about the 2003 series? Mention it all down in the comments. Preferably without spoiling anything about Brotherhood, that would be greatly appreciated, but I am curious to see your guys' list for the best episodes. And yeah, before we end this video though, I just want to give a huge shout out to my currently 4 patrons on Patreon: Omar Bridgman, Deadpool, Corby Dead, and Drew. Thank you guys for your support, I really appreciate it. It really means a lot to me. They have decided to support me, have continued to support me in such a long time. Hope you continue to enjoy my content and continue to support me going forward. Thank you very much. Another thing that I also want to tell you guys before we end this video is something about me that some of you may or may not already know. That will also explain why do I look and dress the way that I do in my videos. That thing being the fact that I am trans. In particular, I am somewhere between a non-binary person and a trans woman, though I am unsure at the moment and probably won't be sure until I talk to a professional who deals with trans people. But that is where the reason why I'm telling you all this comes. I need your help. Due to the fact that I live in a homophobic and transphobic Eastern European country, with a family that won't really ever accept the fact that I'm trans if they ever found out, it's not really feasible or easy for me to transition here with minimal to no repercussions. So that's why I would really appreciate any kind or any amount of support that you guys can give me with this. That said, I don't want to guilt trip you or anything. I don't want you to feel like you have to help me. So if you don't want to or you don't have the means to help out, that's okay. Don't feel bad. I just want you to know that it would be greatly appreciated if you did help me get out of this situation. If you have any further questions, feel free to ask me, and thank you for hearing me out. And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, please leave a like and subscribe. Also, check out the description to my Wattpad, where I post my stories, because in addition to doing all these videos on my channel, I'm also a writer. And if you don't enjoy my stories or simply enjoy my videos, you can head over to my Patreon or to my Ko-fi account, where you can pledge your support and help get the channel going, help support me so I can keep writing the stories you enjoy. But if you don't want to do it, that's completely fine. You can still help me out in other ways, like liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and especially sharing this video with somebody who you think might enjoy it. And I think it's pretty much it for this video, so hopefully I'm gonna see you in the next one. Bye!